So now that we know that absolutely healthy young people can and do die of these vaccine preventable diseases, let's in addition consider why death isn't the only metric that we should be going on when we're trying to determine if we should get a vaccine or not. So, if you're one of those that obviously this is going to apply mostly to COVID vaccines, that were vaccine skeptic or resistant due to concerns about long term effects that have not been studied or documented, that legit, I get that. It's valid. I'm going to have one thing to say on that in a few slides, but then there's two sides of that equation. You also need to consider very well documented potential long term effects of actually getting the vaccine preventable disease, not to mention the similar unknown long term effects of the diseases. We've had side effects of measles, TB, COVID that are shown years later. So, on that front, let's take a look at some of the examples of long term potential effects of these viruses. Um, Lots of infants would get lung scarring from measles related pneumonia, other bacterial or viral infections while the immune system is fighting that original virus. So, very common again during COVID, probably lots of people saw this. When you're sick with COVID, even if you make a full recovery, which most of us did without any, at the time, known complications, you I have had patients that just while they had COVID and their immune system was fighting off this virus, they then got Lyme's disease, which caused more longer term issues for them. Um, Same thing with a pneumonia. It's basically kind of opportunistic infections. While your system is preoccupied with the one virus that could have been prevented by a vaccine, it gets another one that might not be quite so easy to recover from. Um, Dormant viruses can attack an immune system years later, and so some additional examples of that. Viruses that remain dormant in the body and may cause illness later in life. I think the most common one that we all have an idea about is those of us who got chickenpox as a child. Now that virus, those antibodies are in our system, we can get shingles as an older person when the immune system is more compromised. That dormant virus that we had built antibodies towards can come back as shingles, which is much more debilitating than a chickenpox is. Herpes simplex virus. Yeah, I am somebody who, whichever one or two, not sure. Um, the cold sores. I have had that since I was a small child. It apparently can reactivate years later, in addition to causing cold sores, genital herpes. Ooh, so much fun, sounds like. And viral encephalitis, much more rare, but just by having that virus laying dormant in your body from a prior exposure could cause it to reactivate and uh, cause viral encephalitis. The Epstein-Barr virus is the one that causes mono, which is pretty common, again, in kids, but it has also been linked to diagnoses of MS or multiple sclerosis. People who have gotten tuberculosis as a primary infection, um, a form of this can stay dormant in the body for decades and then reactivate under stress or immune suppression. So you just from not being vaccinated, getting the virus at some point, maybe not getting very sick from it at all. Like so many people said, COVID's no big deal. I got it. It wasn't even like a cold. Um, but we are finding out more and more that these viruses laying dormant in our bodies over years, they can come back and cause more serious issues. The most serious one that I came across, this subacute sclerosing panencephalitis. From this point out, we'll just say SSPE is very rare. Well, very rare, but fatal disease of the central nervous system that results from an initial measles infection acquired early in life. SSPE generally develops 7 to 10 years after a person has measles. So obviously, this wasn't something that people were even tying together. That's why this took many years for scientists, medical researchers to realize this was coming from a initial measles infection. Even though the person seems to have fully recovered from measles, no, residual deficits or problems, then since measles was eliminated in the US, SSPE, you rarely got any reports of it. Research basically sort of stopped because, as previously stated, back as of 2000, did I say 15? 2015, it was eliminated. But now we're getting more and more cases. So this SSPE is not as rare as it originally thought to be. So researchers looking at cases of measles diagnosed between 98 and 2015 found that 12 out of the 12 subjects that went on to develop SSPE were diagnosed with measles prior to 15 months of age. So it's when they got it as babies, they were unvaccinated. They apparently, for all intents and purposes, seemed to fully recover. And then 7 to 10 years down the road, they died from this SSPE. So the total ratio found in this study was 1 in 609 infants with measles later developed this condition. And if you develop it, you will die from it. So this is what prompted more education into increasing vaccination rates. And there's a link to this study that you can check out yourself. And then long COVID is, as of now, kind of the best known complication of COVID. As of 2022, the CDC reported that approximately 6.9% of total US adults, which ended up being 1 out of every 5 who had gotten COVID, had ever experienced long COVID. So 6.9% of the total adult population is pretty impressive experiencing long COVID. With 3.4% currently continuing to experience symptoms at the time of the survey. And symptoms include that when I see clients for long COVID, it's almost always they're getting some vertigo or dizziness. And then along with that comes brain fog, just continuing with kind of fatigue, headaches, sleep problems, and a spike in anxiety and depression. All of these symptoms kind of go along together. So this next slide is or this last one in this section is what I alluded to, that one of the main things that you would hear with COVID is that these vaccines are so brand new. They just rushed them out onto the market and basically using us as guinea pigs. And we just have no idea what their long-term effects are going to be. Well, what researchers continue to tell people that researchers that have been working on mRNA vaccines for decades would try to explain for those who would listen to science was that these weren't just developed out of the woodwork. So these would have been the mRNA vaccines were the Pfizer and Moderna ones, and they ended up being the most safe. If you recall, the Johnson and Johnson ended up having some of the blood clotting side effects, and they took that off the market for a little bit. So this just gives you the timeline of from the time that they started to sort of define how an mRNA vaccine would even work was in 1980. And so they had been realizing how effective this could be for a while, but the problem was that it was so unstable because it used this mRNA, messenger RNA. And it wasn't until in 2000 that researchers developed or discovered what modification could make it more stable and allow us to use it in vaccines. And so from that point, they had started undergoing all the normal levels of research and random controlled studies, all the things. So it was really those sort of last stages that are required because our health research system has higher standards than pretty much any place else in the world. That based on all the previous research, the FDA was able to make a very informed decision that the potential risks of side effects of these vaccines do nowhere come near outweighing the benefits of them. So just a little something to remind everybody that these weren't just developed out of thin air and tried to be pushed into our bodies.